Hi, everybody. Today I'll be reading Chapter 5 of Living Nightmare, which is the first book to the series The Other Side of Gifted, and it centers on Tobin Blake, a patient of the Mendwell Institute. In Chapter 4, we met Ange for the first time. Ange is a fellow patient of the 4th floor ward and considers Tobin her best friend, regardless of how Tobin feels about it. Though older than Tobin, she has a childlike mind, and because of this, sees patients as being not necessarily ill, but gifted with abilities. For instance, there's a patient she believes has wind control. Tobin, of course, thinks that she's just crazy. Chapter 5. I was in a little girl's room. She sat at a white table with yellow cups and a teapot on it. Dark red ink covered her hands. When she looked up, one eye was swollen shut and her lip bled. Her nightgown was ripped. Crimson dots, the same red as on her hands, decorated the pink material. My eye throbbed, lips stung, yet there was no fear. By her feet was a broken lamp, its shade off and the base broken. Someone was on the floor. Someone not moving. A man whose head rested in a puddle of growing red. Dream journal. On the 12th of every month, Tobin turned the love seat towards the doors to the common room that led to the nurse's station. She sat, hardly moving, from after breakfast until lunchtime. She didn't notice the people passing by as she stared at her hands folded on her lap. The clatter of patients and the drone of the TV was nothing but a dull hum of electricity to her ears. The 12th was when her parents were supposed to visit, the day they had promised to put aside for her. She sensed the doctor before she saw him. His fancy black shoes made clicking noises when he walked, his shadow preceding him. Her gaze went from her slipper-covered feet to where his shoes almost touched hers. Her head rose, eyes going to his face, and she waited for him to speak. Tobin, he began as he always did, his tone sympathetic. The smile he gave her was sad. Not coming, are they? Her voice was deadpanned. They hadn't come the last 2 months. Why should June be different? She didn't care, she told herself. Her hands trembled, and she shoved them under her thighs. Dr. Dawson sighed. No, they're not. Something came up. They're sorry, and they say they'll make up to you. Tobin swallowed a laugh. She knew the truth. Work came first. How about we go talk in my office? He half turned toward the door, waiting for her. Gracefully rising to her feet, she followed him out of the common room. A group of patients whispered as they parted to let the pair through. The doctor gave them a look, but Tobin kept her focus on the back of his head. His hair stuck up at the back. Did he know? They made it to his office without interruption. He gestured for her to sit and close the door. The doctor took the seat beside her instead of his usual place behind the desk. How do you feel about your parents not coming today? He asked. She gazed at the bookshelf, heard him clear his throat when she didn't respond. Maybe upset with them. No, she said. Did he only read books on mental illness? No, wait. There was a Dan Brown novel shoved between 2 thick volumes on psychiatry and the brain. It's okay if you are, he pressed, touching her forearm. She looked at him. He wasn't wearing his glasses. Did he get contacts? His brown eyes studied her closely. I'm not angry. What do you feel? He continued to pick at the scab of her parents' lack of interest when she didn't answer. They promised to see you once a month, 4 years ago. They've made it 10 times. Does it make you sad? No. He arched a brow at her. She sighed, rested against the arm of the chair facing him. Her neck was hurting from turning sideways. She'd be more comfortable if he had sat at his desk. If I told you I'm happy, would I look bad? Will you later type away at your computer or scribble in your little notebook about how cold I am? She watched him frown, wrinkles bracketing his mouth. Her parents hadn't changed since she was born. She accepted them for who they were. Why couldn't he? He wanted her to feel hurt. I feel nothing, she told him. Nothing. They stared at each other. Why aren't you upset? She shrugged a shoulder. Used to it. They forgot about you a lot. Growing up? She didn't answer. Unable to resist the need to take notes, Dr. Dawson went around to sit at his desk. He opened a notebook and chose a pen from the mug on his desk. When she gave another shrug, he began to write. The scratching of the pen's tip dragging across the page filled her ears. She shifted in her seat, her mind on her parents. Okay, he said. How about we return to yesterday's conversation? Homeschooling. He had already lost her. Her eyes glazed over as the past rushed into the present, dragging her back in time. She was 6 years old, sitting at a brown desk. She swung her short legs back and forth, feet not touching the floor. An open booklet rested on the table. Her face was set in concentration. One more problem left in the 30-page book, and then she'd be done. The book was filled with math equations, science experiments, and some cryptic word puzzles designed to test a 4th grader. A present from her parents at lunchtime. She was expected to finish it before supper. Tobin breezed through the word puzzles, but stumbled over 4 math problems. She pursed her lips, carefully drawing out numbers for the last question. She was on her 3rd attempt. 2 more tries, and 20 minutes later, she did it. Yes. After double-checking her answers, Tobin closed the book and returned her pencil to the blue plastic case on the desk. Cleaning up after herself was important. A clean workspace meant a clear mind. She giggled and hurried out of her room, light on her feet. She hopped down a staircase, one hand gliding across the shiny railing, and turned left at the bottom. Her mother's office was on the 1st floor on the right. Tobin peeked inside. Her mother was at her desk, fingers moving furiously on a white keyboard as she typed notes from a notebook at her right. Her auburn hair was pulled up in a tight bun, her skin pale with a sprinkle of freckles on cheeks and nose. Her rich green eyes never strayed from the page she was typing onto the computer. Tobin tiptoed in and looked around the large beige room. There were no pictures on the walls, nor on her mother's desk. The window behind the desk was bare. 2 floor-to-ceiling bookshelves took up most of the opposite wall, crammed with fat textbooks. Minutes ticked by on the wall-mounted clock as Tobin waited for her mother to notice her. She nibbled her bottom lip. Her parents disliked being interrupted, but they had told her to bring them the book when she was done. Her father wasn't home. Unease flipped her stomach over. Mother? Her mother continued to type. I'm finished. She got a mumble for an answer. She stayed another 5 minutes. Maybe her mother wanted to finish the sentence she was on. The paragraph? The page? Her shoulders slumped. She turned to leave, paused. Her mother flipped to the next page of her notebook, eyes downcast. Tobin left quietly. Back in her bedroom on the 4th floor, roommate-free since Lacey had been assigned elsewhere, Tobin gave a furtive glance at her half-closed door. She was expecting a nurse to barge in any moment and demand that she go to the common room to socialize, but no such thing happened. No one was coming. Tobin got on her knees before the dresser and slid one hand underneath until her fingers touched paper, then dragged out a stack of pages and hugged the treasure to her chest, making herself comfortable on the floor. She leaned against her bed, using it to hide behind. The stack contained about 50 pages. Some were lined, some ripped from notepads. 10 of them were graph paper stolen from the nurse's station. Each sheet was covered in her neat handwriting. Paragraphs, short phrases, and one-line sentences, her thoughts decorated the pages. Words crammed into corners and flowed down the sides. It was her private journal. Dr. Dawson could study the dream journal all he wanted. He could share the entries with coworkers. She didn't care. The messy, finger-smudged, ink-splattered pages in her hands, however, were hers. She wasn't sure if the nurses were aware of their existence, but as long as no one asked her about them, she was happy. From a hole in her mattress, Tobin pulled out a blue pen she had stolen from Dr. Dawson's office. After searching for a blank section on one of the pages, she began to write. Her parents were a poor subject. She loved them, but it wasn't easy. Science and math dictated their lives. Emotions had no place. Her father was a theoretical mathematician who taught at a prestigious private school. Her mother's love was biochemistry. Motherhood didn't slow her down. Tobin's earliest memories of her mother were in her home office, listening to her explain her work. Facts were like relatives, and imagination was a myth. If something couldn't be proven, there was no point in learning about it. Did it hurt when they put their work before her? Of course it did. Did she hope they would change? No. She loved them for who they were. Tobin's day-to-day was up for speculation. Her mind was not. That was the end of chapter 5. Next week will be chapter 6. I hope as you learn a little bit more of Tobin, you understand her past and how confusing her present is at the Mendwell Institute. Also how very lonely she is there, despite Ange being her friend. Until then, I hope you guys had a great weekend and have a great week. Take care, and I'll see you all next week.